Good afternoon to our dear speakers, Excellency Will Nankervis, Excellency Chubuneng, Kun Fatima, General Tamasak, and Mayo, and Pak Mansour over in Indonesia, and of course our team leader of ASEAN-ACT, Dr. Lucia. I think we're ready to start the program for this afternoon. Right, magandang hapon and welcome to this exclusive event featuring a screening of the Ghost Fleet documentary, followed by a panel discussion on the issue of trafficking for forced labor in Southeast Asia's fisheries sector. My name is Kem Sigwan. I am the ASEAN Program Director for Australia, for ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program, and I will be your MC for this event. Whilst I currently work at a strategic and policy level of counter-trafficking issues with ASEAN and its member states, I myself come from an operational background and worked for many years as an immigration official in the Philippines. I know how challenging it can be to be on the front line looking for signs of forced labor and exploitation when people cross borders. It was even more challenging when during screening process, I found that they had been victims of trafficking for forced labor on board fishing vessels. Fishers related that while they hoped for a rewarding work on board fishing vessels, upon this embarkation, they were unfortunately poorer than before. But first, I would like to acknowledge formally the presence of Australia's ambassador to ASEAN, His Excellency Will Nankervis. We are honored to have you open our event today, sir. Thank you so much. And I would also like to acknowledge as well our distinguished panelists. Police General Tamasak Wicharaya, Government of Thailand, Deputy Secretary General to the Prime Minister for Political Affairs. Her Excellency Chu Boon Eng, Government of Cambodia, Secretary of State, Ministry of Interior, Permanent Vice Chairperson, National Committee for Counter-Trafficking. Insignor Mansour, MM, Government of Indonesia, Director for Fishing Vessels and Fishing Equipment. Ms. Fatima Tung Bayachakung, Founder of LPN Labor Protection Network. Ms. Kin Mew Te, Program Manager, World Vision, Myanmar. And welcome to all of you joining us from around the ASEAN region and beyond. We are thrilled that the topic for today's discussion has attracted a large and diverse audience, and we're excited to hear your perspectives on this complex and pressing issue. To our audience and panelists, the interpretation is available in English, Bahasa Indonesia, Cambodian Khmer, Lao, Thai, Vietnamese, and Myanmar Burmese. Burmese interpretation may be accessed by the French channel due to the webinar platform technical limitations. Now, before we begin, I will ask our team to please play the House Rules video. I am now honored to invite His Excellency, Australian Ambassador to ASEAN, Excellency Will Nankervis, who will officially open this event. Your Excellency, you have the virtual floor.
Thanks very much, Kim, and a really good afternoon, counter-trafficking partners, practitioners, advocates, and other distinguished colleagues from around the ASEAN region and beyond. I warmly welcome you to this special virtual event delivered through Australia's ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program, or ASEAN-ACT. I'm pleased to open this exclusive documentary screening and the panel discussion that will follow. This event seeks to bring to light the significant issue of trafficking for labor exploitation, which continues to threaten the safety, security, and prosperity of our shared region. I'd like to start by acknowledging and welcoming our speakers to this event. General Tamasak Wicharaya, Secretary General to the Prime Minister from the Government of Thailand. Her Excellency Chu Boon Eng, Secretary of State and Vice Chairperson for the National Committee for Counter-Trafficking from the Government of Cambodia. Insignor Mansour MM, Director of Fishing Vessels and Fishing Equipment, joining us from Indonesia. Fatima Tung Bayachakung from ASEAN-ACT Partner Labor Protection Network, Thailand. And Kin Mew Te from World Vision, Myanmar. Thank you all very much for being here with us. Trafficking for forced labour is an urgent human rights issue, particularly in distant water fisheries in Southeast Asia. The fishing sector is one of the largest economic industries in our region, providing livelihoods for tens of millions of people in Southeast Asia. And yet migrant fishers are often subjected to physical and psychological abuse and coercion, excessive working hours, and dirty, degrading, and dangerous working conditions. It's also a sector prone to exploitation. Data on the extent of the problem can be unreliable and challenging to obtain, but in 2019, the International Labour Organization estimated that at least 14% of the fishing industry is comprised of people who may be victims of trafficking for forced labour. These statistics are really concerning, and they highlight the need for collaborative action to prevent, identify, and support trafficked victims at sea to pursue justice. Combating labour trafficking in Southeast Asia's fisheries is a complex issue that no one country, government, or non-government agency can solve alone. Identifying and supporting trafficked victims in the fisheries sector is particularly challenging, as large vessels typically operate far from the shores of countries in our region, and workers can easily appear invisible for prolonged periods of time, hence the name of the film. The complexity and transnational nature of distant water fishing highlights the need to work in partnership to better understand the issue and develop joint responses to protect vulnerable workers at sea. Australia recognises the importance of partnerships and values the unique perspectives and expertise of government and non-government organisations working to create a more sustainable and human rights compliant fishing sector. Through ASEAN-ACT, Australia is pleased to be continuing 17 years of partnership to counter trafficking in persons in the ASEAN region, and to be partnering with government and non-government agencies across the region to reverse the plight of trafficked victims and those vulnerable to trafficking. While countering trafficking is extremely challenging and the crime itself continues to adapt and evolve, the problem isn't insurmountable. There's a growing body of evidence and an emerging community of practice focused on how to improve our responses to trafficking, particularly in sectors prone to exploitation. Our understanding of the drivers of trafficking and why it persists is also improving. Through ASEAN-ACT partnership with organisations such as the Labour Protection Network, this documentary, Ghost Fleet, our understanding of vulnerabilities to trafficking and how to reduce them is evolving. The program also partners with La Trobe University in Australia to critically analyse gaps in the justice response provided to trafficked victims in distant water fisheries in Southeast Asia. This research will identify opportunities to improve justice outcomes for victims. The ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, known as ACTIP, calls on ASEAN member states to establish comprehensive policies, programs, and other measures to prevent and combat trafficking in persons. It specifically calls on ASEAN as a region to strengthen bilateral and multilateral cooperation to prevent and combat all forms of trafficking in persons, including for labour exploitation. Colleagues, we know there are particular vulnerabilities at the moment in Myanmar as a result of the conflict, about which Australia is deeply concerned. Australia strongly supports ASEAN's crucial role in responding to the crisis, and calls on the Myanmar regime to allow swift and full implementation of the 5-point consensus and to release all those detained arbitrarily, including Australian Professor Sean Turnell. Colleagues, I'm really looking forward to hearing the perspectives of our esteemed panellists and to seeing the potential partnerships and opportunities that could arise from this discussion. And we look forward to hearing and learning from the collective expertise in this virtual room to address the issue of trafficking for forced labour in Southeast Asia's fishing sector. Australia is really pleased to be working alongside our government and non-government counterparts across ASEAN through our shared commitment to a region free from trafficking in persons. Again, on behalf of the Australian Government and ASEAN-ACT, thank you for attending today and for your participation. We very much look forward to this viewing and to the discussion, genuinely interesting discussion, which I'm sure is going to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for that inspiring message, and a virtual round of applause to you. We are all excited to discuss how we can work in partnership to address this significant issue impacting our region. I will now invite Ms. Fatima the CEO and founder of Labor Protection Network in Thailand, who will introduce the documentary we are about to watch. Kun Patima, you have the floor.
ก็สวัสดีทุกคนนะคะ
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patima Tang Pratchayakul. I am a founder since 2004 of LPN, and I'm really grateful that our documentary is being used to help address trafficking in this region. Since 2004, we started working in counter-trafficking in labor exploitation with Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laotian workers, including Thai workers as well. And over 10 years, we've been working hard to rescue fishermen. In 2014, we went to Indonesia and met with Shannon Service and Jeffrey and the company that was interested in following our work. During the 3 years of working together, that has been documented in this Ghost Fleet. And this documentary showed the facts. And for the fishing crew members and the survivors who were featured in this documentary, they are willing to give their lives as the example so that nobody else will have to lose further in the fishing industry. And we are very thankful for that consent. And what have we done in LPN? We are a small organization that started to have the focus on this, and that led to a rescue of more than 2,900 people out of the situation. And the collaboration came from everywhere, from the Indonesian government, the Thai government, and Myanmar, Laos, Cambodian ambassadors who were more than willing to help, NGOs, members of the press, and community leaders who recognized, well, at the time, it was a modern day slavery, right? And we wanted to eradicate that. And we really hope this documentary would get us up and address the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kun Patima. ASEAN-ACT is honored to be supporting your organization, LPN, to continue to identify and support victims of labor trafficking in the fishing sector, working closely with the Royal Thai government and other key stakeholders. The work of LPN is incredibly inspiring, and the film we are about to watch highlights the importance of your unique perspective on victim identification, support, and repatriation. Really, it is a story not too often told and needs more telling. The film highlights the very serious and long-term impact the crime of forced labor has on the lives of men and boys and their families and communities in Southeast Asia. And I would like to thank Patima and her team for making this documentary. And on the lighter side, Patima, please remind me to get your autograph the next time we meet in Bangkok. Now, on a more serious note, I am very keen to hear from our panelists about what has happened since the making of this film in 2018. The film also demonstrates how easily these victims can become invisible in the fight against trafficking in persons, with many out at sea for years, beyond the reach of authorities and support services. The next is our panel discussion, which will run for 70 minutes. The 50 minutes of direct questions for our panelists and 20 minutes for audience questions. There's a lot to cover. We hope that this could be the first discussion of many discussions to come. And I acknowledge our participants from Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines who are very active in the chat box. Thank you so much. While we go along, I will ask the audience members with questions to type into the Q&A box and continue using the chat box for general comments. And dear panelists, you may now switch on your video cameras for our discussion. I will now hand the virtual floor back to Kun Patima, our first panelist. And if other panelists would like to comment as well, please use the raise your hand function or just simply do this and I can see you. So the first question for Patima, Kun Patima, the Ghost Fleet film features cases from 7 years ago, I think. Could you tell us what key issues still remain for those you assisted? And also, what key issues remain more broadly in the fisheries sector? Kun Patima, please.
ก็สารคดีอันเนี้ย
Right, this documentary is an eye-opener for us to look back at the lives of the fishing crew members. And what happened before that is that the Thai government tried to solve the problems. And it was a turning point. We came up with the laws to protect the workers, and we had PIPO center, everything. And at the same time, we thought the problem is bigger than Thailand. It is a transnational crimes at sea, and we cannot solve that just in Thailand. We need collaboration in Southeast Asia and even globally. And one word that we tend to speak when we speak in big forums is, how do we make sure that the seafood on our tables are not caught by the slaves? We are all responsible. Consumers, buyers, purchasers, producers. We never traced back to the brands, the seafood brands. We would just look at that to make sure that they are fresh, they are clean, but we never questioned those who caught the fish, how they lived, because some of the fishermen said their lives worth less than the fish. So we need to trace back to make sure that seafood on our tables are not caught by the slaves. And that means it is not one person's responsibility. This documentary aims to elevate how we address the problem. And it is a pleasure that we see a lot of law enforcement agencies having a look at this, and that could have some results in protecting the fishing crew. And the last point is about the law enforcement. And the highlight is that if the laws in different countries are still different, that means fishing boats that change their flags, for example, from Cambodia, Myanmar, the ghost fleets will still use slaves and their lives. My dream is that we want to find a way so that consumers can know that the fish we eat are caught by someone who live a good life. So apart from enforcing the law, maybe we need to think about the applications to make sure that fishermen can say they have a good life catching those fish. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for raising those very good points, Patima, and I'm happy that you immediately talk about ethical consumerism. I think we also need to ask, where will the main push come from? Will it come from the consumers or will it come from the government? And I was happy to hear immediately from you that you also talk about cooperation with the Thai government, and then still a lot of things would be done. So I'm going to ask another question for you, that how can working in partnership between civil society and government, in this case, in your case, the Thai government, support this and making sure that fishermen are safe and that our fish, the fish that we eat, do not come from slaves?
มีสองประเด็นนะคะก็คื
Well,
อ
there
ว่า
are two things here.
เราคิดว่า
We think
ทั้งรัฐบาลไทยหรือว่า
the Thai government and
กิจการประมงเนี่ยควรจะ
the fishing industry
แรงงาน
should
ได้รวมตัวกันลูกเรือประมงได้รวมตัว
allow
กัน
workers
ทำกิจกรรมในเส้น
to
ทาง
associate and
เพื่อ
can
ที่
get
เรา
together
มากขึ้น
probably culturally and preferably if they can have their voices heard better.
เราทำเรื่องของกระบวนการ
And we are
อาหารเนี่ย supply chain
working on the traceability
เนี่ยก็คือขั้น
in the supply chain that is
จะ
transparent.
มีการพัฒนาหรือยกระดับ
This should be enhanced. And the last point is that the trust among CSOs and government agencies. Initially, when we started working, it was very difficult. But when we had solid data, the Thai government started to listen to us. And the Indonesian government started listening to us. And we come together and solve the problem. And apart from the participation by NGOs, in the future, fishing workers should also take part in having a push in the legislation.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that you mentioned that because I am now looking at Excellency Police General Tamasak, sir. I think my next question will be for you, given the experience of LPN, of Fatima, since the cases documented in the Ghost Fleet film were made public, Police General Tamasak, what are the measures the Thai government is implementing to address forced labor in the fisheries sector? Are there any new laws or policies or practices that you would like to highlight at this point, sir?
Thank you. I would like to going back to Ambon Benjina when we have cases even before the film coming out. I would like to address that ACT, the predecessor of ASEAN-ACT, in that time has run a multilateral cooperation among 3 or 4 countries that working on cases. At that time, we are declaring anti-trafficking as national agenda. We get some assistance in talking multilaterally with Myanmar, Cambodia, and Indonesia. And of course, we receive Thai workers back from Ambon Benjina about 2,000 and trying to identify whether or not they are victim of crime, trafficking or forced labor. At that time, forced labor is not enacted as a particular crime yet. We have only labor trafficking in our legislation. Of course, we prosecute about 8 boats that involve in committing such crime, and some other victim has been protected, and there are some about 50 offender has been accused and prosecuted. I would like to let you know that during that time, Thailand enacted several legislative measures, including IUU fishing measure, also amended our anti-trafficking legislation to make our procedure, law enforcement in particular, more effective. And I would like to address that at that time, the Thai government received international and global pressure to respond to 3 serious issues, including ICAO, IUU fishing, the US TIP report. And we have been declared and conducted anti-trafficking as well as IUU fishing efforts throughout the past 6 or 7 years. I have been in the process of those while I'm in Royal Thai Police service. General Pawit DPM has been responsible as a single command of those 3 national agendas, and we put high priority of those. In fact, 3 of those has been reconciled, has been improved significantly in the past. We got a tier ranking up from 3 to watch list and tier 2 in the past 6 years. We also received our key card for IUU fishing. We developed a particular unit, for example, for IUU fishing, or the measure that we work with IUU fishing DG and we also working closely with Department of Secretary of the US CTIP office, particularly with NGO and international law enforcement. We are good friends to Myanmar police force. We also getting close, working closely with Cambodian police force. In the past, we have initiative PIPO station in 22 coastal provinces. We install VMS system. We conduct traceability procedure. We also labor screening prior to and after they coming back from fishing, and labor protection. We enacted some of the legislative order to regularize the payment schedule, minimum work, welfare, and so forth. And I think the Thai government have done in our full capacity, and I experienced those, particularly those efforts that led by our Prime Minister and General Pawit DPM. At this point, I may have some sharing during the later discussion on my experience in working with Myanmar and Cambodian. Thank you very much at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much, General Tamasak, sir. I recall the Benjina and Ambon cases. I was still a young person then, General Tamasak, but I have seen you during the APTIP meetings that we have had before. I think those were 10 weeks of intense actions by IOM and other ASEAN actors, Thailand, including Indonesia as well, to rescue more than 600 victims and repatriate them to Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. Just as a follow-up question, General Tamasak, I know that you raised the importance of international cooperation and also cooperation with NGOs, CSOs, and also active law enforcement actions. Do we still see Thailand continuing these responses at this time?
I would like to let you know that I'm so proud to have opportunity to get involved in this field of public policy. I have seen so much progress. I work from my ground up as a director of Children Female Protection and Anti-Trafficking Center of the Royal Thai Police. I monitor cases from the ground, and I monitor the expansion of our investigation to crack down trafficking syndicates. I know some problems that we need to improve, and also I would like to share that working with international law enforcement, particularly HSI, FBI, and the American Embassy, working closely with our neighbor police forces and things like that are crucial to eradicate this problem. And I also know that sometimes employment of migrant workers that we have to rely on are very important to get a kind of G2G, and we need to get a full support. We need also would like to do something to, in other words, facilitate labor shortage in fishing industry, and so many things. In those times, the weaknesses of the government has been attempt to improve in terms of victim screening, victim identification and standard operating procedure, fact-finding about workers, about employees, about payment and so forth. Those are key issues. We would like to separate IUU fishing from anti-trafficking issues, but there are some overlapping issues that IUU fishing might cause more forced labor or labor trafficking. In other words, I think information sharing with the country of origin of workers, either Myanmar and Cambodia, Laos, PDR, the rest. We need to, in other words, not only working on the worker side, we also need to work on the employment agencies in the country of origin. We are relying on those people to go to work in the vessel. But I would like to make clear that right now the system of PIPO and the control of all the vessel fishing in Thailand, there are only 4 vessels that are working outside the Thai national sea boundary, only 4 vessels. So those who are working in our neighbor sea, they are in the process of naturalization to become the flag of the other country already. But in other words, we need to work in various aspects together in order to make everything facilitated, so that there will be less opportunity for traffickers or exploitation on the worker side. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you so much, General Tamasak. Before I let General Tamasak and we move on to the next question, I'd like to go to Patima first. Kun Patima, in the documentary, one of the things that struck me there was the issue of labor shortage. Did the issue of labor shortage increase the risk of forced labor in those fishing vessels?
คือในประวัติศาสตร์หมายถึงว่าพวกเขาลงเรือแล้วเนี่ย
when workers get on board the vessels, they may not get paid according to the contracts. Right now, there may be contracts, but maybe they don't get the full wages. In the past, they didn't get the pay. So working conditions, maybe long hours, and the cost of getting to work legally on the fishing vessels were very high. They had to produce the documents, and they had to come in regularly. For example, if they came from Cambodia, it is very costly. And to bear that cost, would it be the employer or the workers? That is a gap. Is it possible that from the origin and the destination, if we lower that cost, and if a cost is to be paid, it should be so that workers have a better quality of life. For example, accident insurance, welfare. These welfare items have not been in place and accessible, but there's been an attempt, for example, by the Thai government. And that may be something that the countries of origin and the destination have to discuss, because we still eat seafood and we still require that, but how to improve the quality of life of those on board the vessels and incentivize them to come and work.
Thank you so much, Kun Fatima. I asked the question because I've heard General Tamasak also talk about the issue of labor. And because I'm going to ask next our Myanmar panelist, Kin Miote, on the issue of victimization. A number of victims come from Myanmar, unfortunately, and both Fatima and General Tamasak said that a number of victims, even the documentary, we saw that a number of victims come from Myanmar. Now, Kin Mayo, as a transnational crime, migrants from Myanmar are amongst the most vulnerable to forced labor on fishing vessels, as the cases from Benjina and Ambon highlighted, also related to us by General Tamasak. Why has this been the case, and how have circumstances affecting this vulnerability changed since the cases came to light? Mayo, you have the floor.
You. Let me speak in my language because you also provide an interpreter. So thank you. Thank you very
much. Regarding to the question that I'm going to answer, in this new case, most of the there are large number of Myanmar victims are present there, and we all know about this issue as well. As we all know, relate to the bordering along the border, our migrant workers are able to cross into Thailand in many different routes. Another thing is the need of the workers, the demand in Thai side. And in Thailand, there are demand for the need of the migrant workers too. So in that sense, a number of our countrymen, they travel to the neighboring country and they were exploited. Another point is, most important point is, our country is a developing country, and there's been a huge gap in need of employment, and also the instability of the political issues. And due to that, a number of our citizens, they plan to travel to the neighboring country to find a better livelihood, including Jewel. Most of the victims, as we know, they do not have a plan to work on the fishing vessels at the first place. And the reason they arrived Thailand is that they were lured by the brokers. And the brokers give so many false promises, like they have factory works and agricultures, and also including the odd jobs. And many of the migrant workers, they believe that they want, because of the vulnerable situation, they were sold onto the fishing boats. And most of the victims, most of them have a lower education background. Due to that, most of the Thai, when the migrant workers arrive onto the fishing vessels, they were issued the card, and they believe that those cards are they thought that those are the migrant workers' legal cards, but actually it is not. Both those cards are in Thai, and they found out that they were being lured and they were deceived. Because of the vulnerable situation in terms of economic unrest in the country, and and for their families' livelihood, the hardships, a number of our citizens, Myanmar people, where they were lured into a neighboring country and they were sold onto the fishing vessels. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayo. It's particularly interesting to understand the situation from Myanmar perspective. At this point, Mayo, I'd like to hear the story from your own organization. So far, what have you done to be able to address the issue and to help vulnerable people, especially as regards fishing and labor trafficking in the fishing industry? Mayo, please.
Okay,
yes, in terms of on the perspective of World Vision, those who were the trafficking victims or the person who were returned to their hometown, we do the case management at first, and we provide support in terms of like psychology and physical support. The returnees, when we encounter them, based on our experience, these victims have a huge problem in the psychological issue, and many of them have hard time to be in blend with their family and also back into the society, because back on the vessels they have to work in not in a normal working hours, and they were being tortured in different ways. Those are the a while ago in the video, as you may all see, that they were like scars on the hand, on the head. So in that case, we have to rehabilitate them in terms of physical and psychological, and it takes time. It takes time. When we talk to these victims, their psychological back, and in order to be in blend with the family and community, it requires a lot of support from our organization. In World Vision, it's not only our organization. We also have the other local NGOs who are working together with us, and including the government sectors. We do provide a platform, and it's like a platform where the survivors, they gather and they share the experience in a rehabilitation sessions. And because each victims, they have their different backgrounds and different experience and different challenges. In that case, they try to support one another in terms of psychological support, like how they have overcome these bad experience, and we provide them information how they could inquire the jobs. And then we also provide the job skills for them in order for them to rehabilitate. And as an organization, we provide those kind of trainings. At this point, at this time, Ampong and Benjina cases, it's been quite it's been many years, but there are many victims. They're still contacting us, our organization, through telephone calls for they are hoping to receive their compensation until this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayo. It is important that we talk about the experiences of the victims, especially after they are rescued, for them to be rehabilitated, and for them also to recover from the horrendous experiences that they have had in the seas. Now I turn to Excellency Chu Bun-eng. Madam, you have heard from Fatima, Mayo, and General Tamasak about their experiences. Now, I'd like to also get the perspective of your country, Cambodia, and what you have done. The issue of trafficking for forced labor in Southeast Asia's fisheries is a threat to the social and economic security of the region. And from the perspective of a country of origin, as we can see in these cases, especially in the Benjina and Ambon cases, how can Cambodia most effectively address this issue, Excellency?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I'm very impressed of the watching the film, about the ghost fleet. And it's very true, very reality that not only for Myanmar victim, but also from Cambodia as well. As you may aware that millions of Cambodia people are working in Thailand, and thousands of them are in the fishing industry. And as you may aware that talking about the fishery, it does mean that the 3D job. And so far we call about the difficulty, dirty and dangerous job, and it's very hard to manage once they are working at the boat. And since many years, workers are fishing in the fishing boat, have been recruited by force, or sometimes they are working at the boat without any legal document or just holding the fake document. In fact, like we talk about Ambon or in the somewhere, in Indonesia, in 2015, 235 fishermen have been arrested and deported back to Cambodia. And based on the investigation, those workers do not hold the document, the real document. They hold the fake document and what we call fishermen, of Thailand, and they have the fake identity. So sometimes, we can say that if talking about the claim of their rights or they want to have the reimbursement, it's very hard because they do not hold their own document and use the real identity. So, even they claim, but they cannot win, in the judge. And sometimes, they have been dismissed or they die already, or sometimes, we lack of information from them. They cannot communicate with their family to do not allow us to know about the information. So how to solve the problem? That is why I think that the sending country alone cannot do anything successfully until we collaborate each other. And honestly, we have to collaborate with each other to solve the problem in the whole process of fishing period, since the recruitment until the return back home. And for me, I think that so far, like I told you, that it's very hard, to form the complaint or to struggle, you know, in the process of legislation, but sometimes, you know, we just think about what next, you know. We can say that employer and workers should have a fair share of interest and have to take care and support each other. And sending and receiving countries should have a fair share as well for responsibility and protect fairly the rights of employer and employee, especially the rights to life, indignity, rights to protection, and free from exploitation, trafficking, and violation against each other. We do not talk about only the employee or workers, but also we would like to protect the rights of employer as well. And on behalf of the Cambodia, you know, government, we would like to propose some initiative to achieve this perspective as follows. Both sides, sending and receiving countries, should honestly collaborate and respect each other to ensure our commitment in eliminating the issue of trafficking for forced labor and Southeast Asia fishery. Both country partners should have a consent on the recruitment procedure, will be well informed for recruitees, have a clear work contract by highlighting work conditions, protection process within the whole cycle of job periods until return, and the length of contract should not be longer than 2 years. Workers should have checked their health before getting in board and well noted and well registered. Be aware about the time frame of hiring and will recheck again upon return by handing over to the workers to the responsible authority in having clearance of employer. Employers or boat owner have to responsible for the well-being and of hired workers in front of the law. Therefore, they have to inform or report on time, you know, or have the report period basis about the abnormal situation of their workers regarding health situation, danger, dismiss, or any risk faced by the during employment to relevant authorities, including Ministry of Labor or in both countries and diplomatic missions at the destination or transit area. Relevant authorities should intervene in a proper manner to monitor and investigate the case to ensure that the case have been solved pragmatically. After the termination of contract, workers should be allowed to have enough time for being back home and having closely contact with their family and recover their physical and mental health caused by the hardship work for a long time. Any interest should be given based on the policy of both country, destination and origin. Last but not least, workers can decide to apply new job again, depend on the choice, possibility, capacity and decision, and then related to authority, have to facilitate them to get new term or new job or work inside or outside the country. And the region and the world should do something to rescue and support to victims and see how bring them to justice. So I think that we still need, you know, to have the collaboration among us all. You know, it's not only the government, but also the NGOs or partners or anyone who are working on the combating trafficking in person, because victims or workers are also human beings. They need safety, they need better life. Otherwise, you know, they will not have anything for the whole life. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Excellency Chu Boon Eng, for those practical suggestions of practical solutions and interventions that you propose. And I think our audience agrees with you. We have one audience saying that I agree with Excellency Chu Buneng, and others also very encouraging messages, especially for Fatima. If I can just go through a little bit to our chat box. One says that I agree with Excellency Chu Buneng, so thank you so much. Another participant says that thank you so much for this touching and eye-opening documentary, Madam Fatima. May God bless your advocacy to end, or if not, at least minimize modern-day slavery. Those are very encouraging words, and I thank our audience. Just keep your thoughts coming, keep them in the chat box, and if you have questions, please post them in our Q&A box. I see that we already have questions now. It's a great conversation. I know we have a lot to cover, but as I said earlier, we can only cover so much, and I hope that this will only be the first of many discussions that we're going to undertake. I'm going back later to you, Excellency Chu Buneng, but at this time, I'm itching to go to Indonesia at this point to our distinguished panelist, Pak Mansour. Pak Mansour, thank you so much for joining us and welcome. We are interested in hearing about Indonesia's challenges in increasing its maritime domain awareness, given that it's a large archipelago. In particular, Pak Mansour, what measures have been taken to ensure Indonesia is aware of the fishing vessels in its waters? And can you tell us about how your agency is cooperating with other government agencies to improve regulation in the fishing sector and reduce the risk of forced labor? Pak Mansour, please, you have the floor.
Pak, terima kasih. Selamat sore di Indonesia nih, sore jam 15.30.
Okay, good afternoon. It is now 3:30.
Yang terhormat tadi yang sudah membuka acara yaitu Dubes.
So I would like to thank everyone, especially the ASEAN-ACT, and thank you to Mr. Cham Sigwan, the Director of ASEAN Cooperation. I'd like also to address all remarkable panelists. Police General Tamasak Wicharaya, Her Excellency Cho Buneng, and then Ibu Fatima, and also Kin Myo Tan. I'd like to have your permission. It should be our Director General of Capture Fisheries that should be here. However, as he has another event to attend, so I'd like to have your permission. We from the Directorate of the Fisheries, Fishing Vessel, from the Ministry of Fisheries, we are, well, I being assigned to replace him, and of course, I'd like to address all distinguished participants. I have read all the response, and many of those response are positive. Well, I'm here with Bapak Iqbal. He is the head of Subdirectorate for Surveillance. So every day he is working on several aspects, including human trafficking issues in fishery industries. So ladies and gentlemen, in this occasion, I'd like first to address my gratitude. I'd like to salute Ibu Fatima for the film. As you know, we as a normal person, I'm sorry, but Mr. Mansour connection seems to be disconnected. Well, I think Indonesia has made a quick move together with relevant parties, as mentioned, Benjena, Avona, Kaimana. So since 2015, we have established what we call as the Task Force 115. So this is what the name that has been known everywhere here in Indonesia. So about the measures that we take. So the ministries of marine and fisheries, especially in order to make sure or to find the whereabouts the fishing vessels in Indonesian Ocean. Well, as has been mentioned, Indonesia is an archipelagic state with hundreds of thousands of islands. So this is not only our sole responsibility. So we have devices on IT devices, and using this device, we continue to improve our capacity, the outreach, all capacities, especially to monitor all the fishing vessels, especially fishing vessels above 30,000 GOT. And then the ministries, our ministry has committed to enforce, to tackle any fishing vessels conducting the IUU operating in Indonesian seas. So our commitment, we want to transform those illegal fishings to legal fishings, from unreported to reported. So we hope there will be no longer any illegal fishings taken place here in Asia. And the next thing, I think you have seen this on media about the concrete steps that we have taken. Among others are capturing the vessels that conducting illegal fishing, and then we prosecute those perpetrators. And the vessels, we can transform those vessels to do other things. For example, research that can bring benefits, for example, fishermen in Asia. So these are just some things that we have done here in Asia. The Ministry of Marine and Fisheries, we are grateful that the improvement efforts on working condition, especially in fishery industries, has received tremendous support, both from the government and also non-government agencies. In terms of regulations, since 2015, ladies and gentlemen, especially related to Benjana cases, since 2015, the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries has already a regulation that regulate the working condition in fishery industry, especially related to fishing vessels and the industry as a whole. So this regulation is the ministerial regulation number 35 of 2015 about the system and certification of human rights in fishery business. And in 2021, the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries has determined their latest regulation to ensure that there won't be any worse working condition on any fishing vessels. This is the regulation of Minister of Marine and Fisheries number 33 of 2021 concerning the working requirements. Well, this is also regulate the cooperation at sea, the social securities, also regulating the competence of those workers, and also the obligations of the vessel owners and their responsibilities. So in this end of war, the ministry also received support from the coordinating Ministry of Maritime and Investment that established a team to protect the boat crew. So in terms of legislation, we have made some improvement. We have made them in favor of the boat crews. Of course, the realization or reality on the ground needs to be monitored, needs to be overseen together so that we can ensure its enforcement. And in terms of dissemination of those relevant regulation toward the stakeholders, the ministry also receives support from various parties, including non-government organizations, both at international level, for example, international like IOM, Yayasan Plan Indonesia, and also the ILO office here in Jakarta. We also receive support from other non-government organizations. May I continue?
Yes, please, Pak Mansur.
Oke. Baik. Yang
All right.
selanjutnya tentu
And then about well, our government, the ministry, we are committed to protect the citizens, our Indonesian nationals working abroad. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through our representative, they are working, focusing on advocacy, repatriation of our boat crews that face any issues overseas. So their assistance is to make sure that Indonesian crews is being taken care of. They meet their health rights, receiving treatments if they are sick. Our government also try to improve our procedures on recruitment, placement of our boat crew that will work in the fishing vessel with foreign flags, and to make sure that those crews are being protected, well, before, during, and after work. So that would be all that I can share, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pak Mansur. I have an interesting question for you, but I'm going to reserve it later when we discuss the questions from the audience. But just as a follow-up, Pak Mansur, you mentioned you are using technology to address the issues in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And technology is one of the solutions seen by many actors, access to technology for in the fishing industry and access to technology for the workers in the fishing sector, for fishers themselves. So, Pak Mansur, my question is, how has been the experience? What's the experience of Indonesia in your use of technology? Has it been helpful for you? Has the reporting increased dramatically? Has the experience been positive? Pak Mansur, please, if you can shed light. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your questions. Well, I'm sorry, I cannot share the quantitative data because this data belongs to the other directorate, not in my directorate. However, based on the information, apart from having the fleet, they also have the technology. So later, through the policies, the latest policies of our minister, we will improve that with the current technology, that it will enable us so that we can see, pinpoint not only the vessel position, whether they are breaching the lines or not, but we all can also know their dimension, the size, and so forth. We are now improving this technology. So we, the ministry, we are developing what we call as the measurable fishing devices. So on top of on how those optimizing these resources, checking the healthiness of the sea, the welfare of our workers. Our minister used the terms blue economy. So we also trying to improve the facility to oversee all of this. So we are now improving this. Well, it's ongoing. Maybe this can answer.
Thank you so much, Pak Mansor. Thank you. That's really very helpful and quite interesting. It's a very practical solution. I know that General Tamasak has some thoughts at this point. I see you, sir, writing some notes. May I please go to you, General Tamasak, so far for your reaction? What are your thoughts at this point? What have you learned? And what can Thailand do more to address the issue? And after General Tamasak, I'm going to go back to Fatima for her reactions as well. General Tamasak, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. We have a lot of technical application to IUU fishing measure, those related to vessel monitoring system, VMS. Also, that will be monitored directly by Department of Fisheries. At Paipo station, there will be application computerized to get all the information of migrant workers, their C book, and all the history of screening. And I'd be happy to share if ASEAN-ACT or any people from your embassy in Bangkok would like to participate and take a look. I know that DPM General Pawit are very active in putting those into effect. On the monitoring the vessel for fishery, for small vessel, we are applying a small system that is recommended by EJF. We are considering with the Ministry of Treasury to apply to put instrument in that vessel, smaller vessels. I can tell that right now, the Paipo administration, our MDT team are conducting victim screening and victim identification at port in and out. We are considering to do some regular victim screening when they are on shore as well, in order to get to know all the migrant workers 100% that are on the pipeline that we are planning. I think there are more rooms for technical application in this area of public policy, particularly how to see all the manpower in fishing industry as valuable resources. And I has been discussed with Minister of Labor how to apply biometric application for either visa and work permit, C book and all those, whether or not it can be applied to those who are working in Thailand. But right now we have a little bit of limitation on vessel registration. There are some things that we need to make it better. Anyway, in the past 6 years, Thailand has done so much and has spent a lot of budget on this. As you know, we spent more than nearly 100,000 euro on IUU fishing improvement, not to discuss what the anti-trafficking policy that we also put a lot of effort. Those will tie together, but we are not. We are talking to our EU IUU fishing team that we are not tie forced labor and labor trafficking to related to IUU fishing. Anyway, we are developing protocol and SOP that related to forced labor trafficking, and other exploitation into a mandatory legislative and also administrative form, so that our competent authority can apply those. And those who are screened, during that screening until formal victim identification, we are willing to support with government expenditure for those during our screening as well. So far, thank you very much for now.
Thank you so much, General Tamasak. Now, I think we're ready to go into the Q&A. But before we go into the Q&A, I'd like to first go to Fatima to get her initial thoughts of what we have heard so far. And after Fatima, we'll go to Excellency Chu Buneng, and then we go into the Q&A. Go ahead, please, Fatima.
Right, from 6 years ago, we have to admit that there have been changes and progresses, but these changes in the Thai legislations and efforts to establish a monitoring mechanism for the vessels and people, these are appreciated, but with stronger legislations, perpetrators have changed how they operate. They change the flags of their vessels, and sometimes they become ghost fleets, actually. For example, if we have the fishing crew members who are stuck in Malaysia, and before they get rescued, they may be prosecuted as irregular migrants, even though they should have been treated as a trafficking victim. But the Malaysian law may not be provided for the identification for these crew members. So until they get rescued and coming back home, they may have to serve some time for that offense. And with the strength in the Thai legislation, the vessels have changed how they operate. And there are also maritime crimes that took place. And how do we solve that? And how do we rescue those crew members who are stuck in Papua New Guinea or in other places? In these islands, how the victim identification is going on, we are not very sure. And for the application, of course, if there are promotion on the sending and receiving ends, or efforts from the two sides to enhance the quality of lives and the work for fishing crew members, and to elevate it to a craft that is recognized, that would be a great thing. In the past, fishing crew members are criminals, people who had served time, and we should recognize that it is an important occupation that put food on the tables of the world. We are starting to talk about this actively. In the past, we talk about this separately in different countries, but now we are recognizing that this is a global problem. And at the same time, businesses will have to also think about this and recognize that it is their responsibilities as well.
Thank you so much, Fatima. You stressed those points very well. And now I am ready to go to the questions from our participants. We have a number of questions here, and they're all very interesting. My first question will go to Excellency Chu Boon Eng. Madam Excellency Chu Boon Eng, one of the things that our participants are asking, will bilateral labor agreements, government-to-government agreements, help address these issues? And what have been the experience of Cambodia, especially that first, earlier you talked about the responsibilities of sending and receiving countries. Will bilateral or multilateral agreements help the issue? Excellency Chu Boon Eng, please.
Yes, thank you so much for this question. And I really appreciate, to the government of both countries to have the effort, to solve this issue. But I think that for the MOU since 2005 until now, we just focus on how to use the legal migrant, to work in Thailand, for example, between Thailand. And as we may aware that many, migrant workers have been legalized in 2019. And we have provided them some document, and I think that it's not enough, but we can say that most of them took the legal document already. But after 2 years, especially by now, those documents are invalid already. So we just think that how to recruit them, because most of the migrant workers who are working in fishing industry do not been recruited from the sending country, but they are recruited at the destination country because they are there already, So how to manage? And as we may aware that there are different type of fishing boats where they have the type of return daily or weekly or monthly or yearly. And the most risky job is at the big boat where there are doing fishing in the ocean, and workers cannot come back home, and they have been used and treated as slave already, So I just would like to know, once the fishing boat just cross the international border, sea border, how to make the intervention, even we have the what we call the IT, we have the technology, to manage the number of the boat, but I think that it's very hard, to manage them once they are across the international border already. And so right now, for me, I also like to ask a question that how to make sure that the recruiter, can ensure the real identity of workers. Even we have registered them and make sure about the identity, but the identity have been fake already. So once they have something at risk, we cannot assist them. Many cases already, it's so pity because they cannot be complained and intervened by the law. That is why I always, suggest that we have to discuss again and again until we have the consent with each other on how to manage the process of recruitment and to taking care of children, of the migrant workers at the sea, because sometimes we cannot just manage them at the sea, but we have to manage them during the recruitment before getting to the boat and after back home, and to ensure that they are safe, they are healthy, and they can have what we call the time, to contact with their family or their children. Otherwise, they are very dangerous, because once they lose or dismiss, we do not know and do not know how to seek for them and how to intervene, and we have to think about the next generation of the migrant workers who are staying home and look for their father or their family, So that's the burden again to taking care of the children. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Excellency Chubuneng. And I'm going to go to Mayo to react to those statements. Mayo, if you could also answer the question of Excellency Chubuneng, that how can we ensure that the workers are properly documented, and what can we do to ensure safe recruitment and that the workers are aware of the risks of the recruitment?
For me, I can say that the recruitment can be done by both sides. And based on the MOU, because we have the MOU to accept together that we have to use the documented migrant workers or legal migrant workers rather than just accept them to work, without document. And right now, why we have millions of people can work, without document at the destination country, because I think that the employer allow, to allow them to work even without any document. So we have to make sure that how to ensure that they have been protected, because without any identity, I think that the protection can be difficult.
Especially, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Excellency. And from the Cambodian experience, I think we can also hear from our Myanmar speaker your thoughts on the same question. Mayo, please.
As for Myanmar country,
sending country,
as a sending, on a perspective of sending country, as Cambodia, regarding to the formal recruitment matters, the process for the fishing boats, if we do have that process, it will be great. And if we do so, we have to make it thoroughly and legally. And there should be a mechanism where it should be trusted. In terms of the recruiters should follow the according to law, and also the regulation. They have to follow the regulations. And as for the workers, migrant workers, regarding their rights and social protections, and we have to support it in terms of, we have to highlight their rights and social support. And when we have the projects, from our point, like information related to information dissemination, we will have to focus in when providing the information to the migrant community, such as to the sending country and the receiving country, to both sides. And we need to put much more effort to this group. And by doing so, we believe that the exploitation may reduce. And in Bajina and related to those cases, the incidents, we see that those incidents have reduced at some level, but there are still many other cases where when there are cases out of reach, and there may be cases where we couldn't identify. Because of that, the government, like from the sending country and the receiving country, not only the government perspective, also the NGOs, INGOs, and CSOs, civil society organizations. We all have to collaborate, and we have to put efforts to tackle this matter, this labor exploitation, especially in the vessels. And we believe by doing so in collaboration together, we believe that those exploitation will reduce in fishery sector. And in our country, as a sending country or the source country, we do have so many experiences. And at this point, when now we have the MOU and bilateral, multilateral, and we do have those practices into action. All these migrant workers on the fishery vessels, they may have a very little knowledge, but we have to support them to protect and to have to protect them from our part as much as we can, and from the perspective of human beings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mayo and Excellency Chu Buneng, for reinforcing both of those thoughts. My final question at this point is for Pak Mansour, and maybe also General Tamasak can react to the question. One of the questions of our participants is, can the vessels be confiscated and sold, and the money raised be provided to the victims of trafficking as compensation? Pak Mansour, if you can respond to this question, please.
Mohon izin, yang saya tahu, mungkin nanti izin kalau Pak.
This is the extent of my knowledge.
Kami selama di sini belum pernah ada kejadian seperti itu. Artinya kapal disita kemudian dijual.
So far, there have been situations where the vessels have been sold, and then the money, or there have been no situations like that. So there have not been any vessels sold and then the money used for compensations. But this is a good suggestion. I think this could be a popular action. There was also a situation in Benjina where one of the vessels was confiscated and then was put to drown. There were also cases where we confiscated the vessel and then we prosecuted the case. The process is still going on. And once the court makes the decision, we will think of a way so that the confiscated vessels or boats will be useful for the fishermen. So thank you for the good input. That's all, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Mansour. And now I turn to General Tamasak. Sir, your thoughts on compensation and perhaps the same question as well. General Tamasak.
According to anti-trafficking legislation, both vessels that used to be in the case of labor trafficking and forced labor can be seized, and that will go to the Ministry of Treasury. The compensation can only be sued from the employer. But the current development, we are drafting the legislation amendment to asset forfeiture will go to the anti-trafficking fund, and we going to take money from anti-trafficking fund to compensate while we are waiting for court decision. to get those compensation from the offender. But anyway, those has been in the process of amendment or aspect of limitation that we are going to apply to comply with active and ASEAN Plan of Action that on the pipeline. And I would like to take this opportunity to clarify some of the questions that has been asked before. According to our VMS system, vessels that go across the national borderline will be alerted in our system. Those who have suspicious behavior of VMS on and off or suspicious movement, we gonna do some detailed inspection on those vessels. So I think we are pretty sure that under control, monitoring, we are pretty much assure that our systems are effective. Related to vessels that change their flag legally or illegally, if they change their flag illegally, they will be IUU fishing vessels. Those will be prosecuted. And we also receive some of the intelligence that vessels from other countries are coming to Thailand with those kind of IUU. We're going to have our Marine Department and our Navy to react. But for those who are conduct a legitimate way of doing business, for example, a company who are registered as our neighboring country for their company, and they buy vessel from Thailand to other country, that still legitimate internationally. We cannot penalize those if that combine binding to international practices. For example, some kind of multi company, but this is not the case if they have a Malaysian nationality of company and they use Malaysian flag on their vessel. We cannot do anything about it. But those vessels who are conducting fishing outside of Thailand, we have only 4 vessels on that line, and we also monitor with it with our VMS control command system at the headquarters of the Department of Fisheries. I can assure you that is the case. And I also would like to address some of the attempts being made by Minister of Labor to work bilaterally with Myanmar, Cambodia, bilaterally for MOU employment. And I also acknowledge some of the problem in some other country that because of the uprising or problem in those particular country, we don't have any people who are enlisted in that MOU employment program. And I'm also happy to be connecting point to work with Ministry of Labor from Thai government with some of the panelists, for example, from Cambodia, for example. I'm very happy too. And also we are hoping that if SOP and protocol for forced labor and labor trafficking has been approved by national committee, we going to be happy to share, because we are working with IJM and ASEAN-ACT on this kind of development. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, General Tamasak Pak Mansur, Excellency Chubuneng, Kun Mayo and Kun Fatima. Thank you all for your efforts, for your time, the expertise. Just hearing from you really is encouraging. Us in the audience could only ask the questions, but you are in the front lines, and we are very honored to have you tonight or this afternoon. It's already night where I am. So at this point, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now going to give a little bit of time to Kun Fatima for some final words on what we should do to focus the support to victims. Fatima, we thank you for being here today and for sharing the thoughts and the stories with us. And now we give back to you the floor for your courage and your work. For your final thoughts, please.
Right. I would like to say that we think everybody is part of this responsibility. When we have the seafood on the table, how do we make sure that it is not caught by the slaves? If we keep asking this, we'll think about the fishing crew, and then we think about how we address the problems, and think that if we consume irresponsibly through IUU fishing, we will not leave any resources to the next generations. The lives of the fishing crew should be valuable. They have been unrecognized, and now they have been better recognized, and the stories are being shared for the change. And we hope the 600 people who are present and learned about this will also spread the words and encourage responsibility to take care of the fishing crew. This is the very first opportunity that the countries in this region talk actively about this, and we hope we can address the problems, and that will lead to positive changes. We should not point fingers who are to blame. It is our common responsibility to reset and eradicate the modern-day slavery. I thank you for this day.
Thank you so much, Kun Fatima. And before we end and we go to the closing session, I would like to request our audience to please fill out our feedback form. It will inform us if you still want me to be the next host of ASEAN-ACT webinar or not, and what we need to improve on our next webinars. Please, for those who will fill out the feedback form, you're going to receive your certificates. Kindly email also our email address to receive your certificate. So please fill out the feedback form to help us improve the webinar series. So we have now come to the end of our session. Thank you to our panelists and to our audience for joining. We appreciate your strong interest and participation. I will now hand the floor to Dr. Lucia Pietropaoli, ASEAN-ACT team leader, to officially close the session. Dr. Lucia, you have the virtual floor.
Thank you very much, Kem. On behalf of ASEAN-ACT, I have the great honour of closing this virtual event. First and foremost, please allow me to express our sincere thanks and appreciation to all of our panellists, all of whom have been extremely generous in dedicating their time to this event and in sharing their knowledge and experience on this complex and pressing issue of trafficking in Southeast Asia's fisheries. General Tamasak, thank you so much for updating us on the important steps that Thailand has taken to improve vessel search, port in, port out inspection, labour screening, and the interagency cooperation that is going on to prevent and detect forced labour in Thailand's fishing sector. Thank you also for highlighting the importance of transnational cooperation and for reminding us that this is not an issue that one country can solve alone, and that government-to-government cooperation is critical, not only from the law enforcement perspective, but also to address the labour demand and supply issues in our region. Her Excellency Chubanang, your perspectives as a counter-trafficking champion were much appreciated. You helped us to understand the challenges faced by countries of origin in ensuring that their citizens are safe and protected when they work at sea. Thank you for reminding us about the balance of interests between sending countries and receiving countries. And also that we need to discuss and discuss again this issue until we agree on a way forward and an approach to combating and resolving this issue. Thank you also for reminding us of the need to balance the interests and needs of employers and employees. A critical reminder that we do need to include the private sector in our discussion. We're looking forward to engaging with you further on your very practical suggestions to improve this situation. Bapak Monsignor, we thank you for enlightening us on the steps Indonesia has taken to improve surveillance of a very large and vast archipelago, the registration of vessels throughout the whole of government task force Indonesia has set up. You also showed us that technology can help us to improve maritime domain awareness and look out for signs of IUU fishing as well as forced labour at sea. This is a very important part of managing the risk, and it's wonderful to hear that Indonesia is collecting and analysing more data on what's happening in its waters. Kin Mio, thank you so much for highlighting the perspectives of victims. You reminded us that Myanmar citizens and indeed other citizens in this region travel regularly to neighbouring countries to find employment and to meet the labour shortages across Southeast Asia. You also highlighted the role that brokers can play in easily deceiving vulnerable migrant workers and the importance of civil society and government in cooperating to protect these vulnerable migrant workers. The case management work of Myanmar World Vision is critical in ensuring that victims who are rescued can be supported to recover from their experience, reintegrate back into their communities, and eventually go on to lead healthy, connected, and productive lives. And last but not least, of course, Kun Patima, we thank you for your professional and your personal bravery and your dedication. And we thank you for the tireless work that LPN does in bringing awareness to the issue of labour trafficking and labour exploitation in the entire region. We thank you for your ongoing efforts to ensure that victims of labour trafficking, be they Thai, Myanmar, Cambodian, Indonesian, or other citizens of this region, have access to justice and the support that they need. One of the most important points that you raised was about the full and consistent implementation of the laws that we already have in place, and that the responsibility for action rests with all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, the final thanks goes to all of you. We're so pleased that such a diverse range of counter-trafficking advocates, government agencies, academics, and interested participants from right across the region are in attendance today. I'd particularly like to acknowledge the participation of ASEAN-ACT civil society partners, including Legal Support for Children and Women from Cambodia and other members of LPN, of course. We hope that today's discussion is just the start, and we are so pleased to have convened the first discussion, really, between regional actors of this nature, based on a very thought-provoking film. We hope that we can develop practical and sustainable solutions to addressing trafficking in this important economic sector for Southeast Asia. In closing, please allow me to reiterate that ASEAN-ACT stands behind ASEAN and the countries of Southeast Asia to bring the perpetrators of trafficking to justice and to protect the rights of victims, including those at sea. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lucia Pietropaoli, the team leader of ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Program. It has been a pleasure to host this virtual event. We hope today's screening and expert discussion has promoted thinking, knowledge sharing, and perhaps even action towards addressing this critical challenge we face collectively in combating human trafficking in the ASEAN region. Once again, please fill out the feedback form. We will be happy with your thoughts. And thank you and good evening to everyone. Thanks once again to our panelists, Excellency Chubuneng, Pak Mansour, General Tamasak, Mayo, and Pak Kun Patima. And we say goodbye and good night to all of you.